Welcome back, friend. So let us start with the second part of IBC 2016. In the first part, we have understood the basic introduction part, and in this part, we'll go further a step ahead, where we'll understand the various stakeholders who are involved in the IBC process, and then we'll take an overall macro, holistic view of how the IBC process starts. So, taking a cue from where we left in our last lecture, let us move ahead and understand the benefits of this IBC process, where we had mentioned that apart from uh, getting the ease of doing business index high, probably one very important concept comes in here, friends, that in times to come, all the lenders who are giving money to the borrowers, probably they will now more emphasize on the cash flow rather than the security angle. Because under IBC, the purpose of IBC is to sell the business as a going concern. And when there will be a positive cash flow arising out of the business, probably all the people who would like to invest or buy out that company would be more interested in the cash flow rather than what the security is being offered against that particular company. And therefore, the bankers would have a different perspective. Yes, security would be important, that for sure, not no doubt about it. But then again, the more focus would be on the cash flow part and how business is going to be done in time to come. So that will be a major paradigm shift in time to come from the lender's angle. Therefore, this IBC is not only purely creating a resolution for the company, but totally a change in the mindset. Right? It is said that सृष्टि बदलनी है तो दृष्टि बदलनी पड़ेगी शायद this IBC will create a new mindset, a vision for giving loan to a company. As we have discussed, this is a act which will subsume lot many acts, and the major acts which have been subsumed under this particular act is the Sikh Industrial Act and the Presidency Town Insolvency Act, a very old act which has been subsumed into this particular act. And apart from that, we all know that there are 10 other acts which have been amended because of this particular act, and the 10 acts are listed down here. So which means that it has an impact on lot many other areas. It's not only about purely an independent IBC code, but it will cover a lot many other acts, and that too all the important acts which applies to running of business trend. So it's not that this IBC has a standalone impact. Probably it impacts a lot many other areas, and therefore the cognizance has been taken in the other act, and the various other acts have been amended, including the Income Tax Act, including the GST Act, and the Companies Act. Therefore, it has been said it is a BAP of all the acts. What? For what reason? Because there is a provision under this act which says that the provision of this code shall have effect, notwithstanding anything inconsistent therewith contained in any other law for the time. Of course, that means that is why it has been written that this time हम तुम्हारे बाप लगते हैं. So friends, very important because it has got an overriding effect on the other provisions of the other act. Therefore, we all understand now this IBC has got a superlative degree, and probably if you go to the hierarchy of all the acts, it will fall in the top of the most of the categories. So, what has been the progress of IBC over a period of time? If you see from the day the IBC concept came into this country, and you'll understand that there has been a lot many changes which have happened in this particular act, right from the conceptual stage to the current state of the IBC. So if you go back to the year 2015, you'll understand that a committee was formed, that was a banking law reform committee in 2015 by the government, and they came up with two heavy volumes of the committee report where they highlighted that for what reason this law is framed and gave various other factors that why this law is required. So after making it open for the public and getting the public comment, JPC, the Joint Parliamentary Committee, was formed in 2016, which again studied the particular reform committee recommendation. And then in 2016, again in October, the law was framed and given shape and was presented in the parliament. And in 2016, the law was passed in October 2016. Thereafter, then a lot of ordinance and the amendment came in right from November 2018. And in the current state, if you see till 2000, March 2020, even in the current state, even after the lockdown period, if you see the current state, I think the recent changes have been there in this particular act. Right. So if you see the progress, I think the progress has been fast. The actions taken by the government has been very fast, looking to the environment, looking to the impact of the various companies which have come under the insolvency cases, looking to the Supreme Court decisions, and therefore the government has taken immediate steps to rectify whatever could be done in this particular act. So the progress, if you see, has been not very long, but yes, it has been very fast. So understanding the framework of IBC, let us have develop the view that how this IBC works in, who are the people involved in this IBC process. So what I've done, I've segregated this framework of IBC under two heads. The two heads are the regulators and the adjudicators. Now, who are the regulators? Who are the adjudicators? So, if you see the framework, institutional framework, the regulators comprises of the board, that is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, that is referred to as the board. Then we have the IPA, that is Insolvency Professional Agencies. Then we have the Insolvency Resolution Professionals. These are basically the individuals who will do the work. Then there are support services like information utilities. So these are the regulator part. And then we have the adjudicators part, that is the adjudicating authorities, which comprises of NCLT. Then we have the NCLAT, the Appellate Tribunal. Then we have the DRT, Debt Recovery Tribunal. Then we have the Appellate Tribunal, and then the Supreme Court. So if you see the hierarchy in terms of adjudicating authorities, you'll find that there's a missing element, a missing gap is the High Court. And that again highlights the importance of this act and shows the intention of the government that they want to speed up the process of resolution under IBC. That is why they have skipped this particular level of High Court. And whatever cases are decided in the NCLAT or DRAT, probably they will directly go to the Supreme Court. So that is the missing element, the missing gap, but that is for a purpose. So let us start and understand the institutional framework and understand each of the stakeholders involved in this whole process, and what is the constitution of each of the stakeholders and what is the function they are going to perform. So the first on the top, it will come as the Insolvency Bankruptcy Board of India, and it consists of the chairman, 3 members each representing the different Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Corporate, and Ministry of Law, and then 1 member nominated by the RBI, and then the 5 members nominated by the government, of whom 3 shall be the full-time member. Right. So that is basically the constitution. Along with that, there are the top heads of all the institutes, the professional institutes, that is ICAI, ICSI, and ICMI. They'll also be the part of the IBBI board. But yes, probably they will have a limited role. Then it is known as the apex body, which will be the role of the IBBI would be the administration part, where they will try to administer the IPA, that is Insolvency Professional Agencies, then the Insolvency Professionals, and the Information Utilities. And the whole idea is to promote transparency and best practices in its government. That is the whole idea. And they will try to make model laws to be adopted by all these IPA, prescribing minimum standards of professional competence, ethics to be followed. And then very important, they will be responsible for conducting the exam. And we will come to know that to become an IP, we need to clear the exam. So they will be the governing agency, the body where the course syllabus will be decided and the way the exams will be conducted. The board will take the call on that particular aspect. So it is more of an administration role. That is one angle in terms of the IP and the IPs. And then again, the major job is to ensure the minimum standards of professional competence and ethics. Again, a very important function which has been given to this particular board is that they can exercise the power under this code, which is similar to this code of civil procedure. Well, while trying a suit in respect to the following matters, namely the IBBI board can call for the discovery and production of books of account and other documents at such place and such time. Then they can summon and enforce the attendance of persons personally in respect of any books and register on either document, and then issuing of commission for the examination of witness or document. So that means to a certain extent it has got some powers which are above a particular level. So that again highlights the importance of this board, where they can, if they want to develop an inquiry against a person, probably they can do it. So a very powerful board in terms of this insolvency bankruptcy code, and probably over a period of time they have been doing a very good job and acting very fast. Yes, because the law has certain limitations at various places, but they're trying to plug in all the rules and ensure that the objective is being achieved. So next comes the IPA. What does IPA means? It is any person registered with the board under section 201 of the Act. So the IPA, the purpose of IPA is to ensure compliance with the code and rules, regulations and guidelines issued thereunder governing the conduct of IPA and the insolvency professional. So probably what they will do, they will follow the rules and the code which have been issued by the board, and therefore they will govern all the IPs who are registered under the IPA. So if you see the hierarchy of the structure, there is the board, right? Then comes the IPA, right? The board, IPA, and below the IPA there will be IPA. So IPs will come to the IPA part, and the IPA will go to the board part, right? So that is the hierarchy of the structure of the institutional framework. And the other objective is to employ fair, reasonable, just and non-discriminatory practices for the enrollment and regulation of institutional members. So all the IPs will be registered with the IPA, and for that they will employ all the fair and justifiable method. And then they will be accountable to the board. Obviously, as I said, in the hierarchy, they will be responsible to the board. The other objective, to develop the profession of insolvency professionals across the country, and for that they may market the course, they may market the profession, they'll conduct various seminars, webinars of continuous professional development for its members, then improve upon the internal regulations and guidelines to ensure that high standards of professional and ethical conduct are being maintained by the members, and then whatever information the board asks from time to time, they will provide that particular information to the board. So again, the administration part will be there. So board has got some certain kind of administration level. The IP has got the certain kind of administration power. And the criteria of becoming an IPA, the criteria is strict. Nobody can become an IPA in a very easy manner. And as per the regulation, the objective of the IPA should be one only objective, that is to be a part of this IBBI bylaws, and the governing board of IBA will create the bylaws which have been framed by IBBI, and they'll adopt that bylaws. Then the minimum net worth in the financial part is 10 crores, and the paid up share capital would be 5 crores. Okay, so this is basically more of the so if you see in the current state, there is a so under the current state, we have 3 IPAs, that is the ICAI IPA, the ICAI cost IPA, and the ICSI IPA. So these are 3 institutes which have been part of this IPA role. Now, another restrictive criteria for the IPA to become an IPA is that not under the control of person resident outside India, and their shareholding directly or indirectly does not exceed 49%. And then it should not be a subsidiary or body corporate to more than 1 layer. And its promoters, directors, and persons holding more than 10% of share capital are fit and proper person. So these are the restrictive criteria of a particular IPA. And therefore, there are not many IPAs who have applied to become the IPA so far. Then comes the procedural part. What is the procedure to be followed by the IPA to become the IPA? So they have to be registered with the board, and then the board considers the following principles before giving them the registration certificate. So the following principle consists of to promote the professional development of the regulation of insolvency professional, and to promote the services of competent insolvency professionals to cater to the needs of debtors and the creditors and the persons as such. To promote good professional and ethical conduct among the insolvency professionals, to protect the interest of all the debtors, creditors, and such other person as may be prescribed, and to promote the growth of insolvency professional agencies for the effective resolution of insolvency and bankruptcy process under this code. So the objectives have been clearly laid down, and I think all the IPAs, all the 3 IPAs are following all these guidelines and trying to develop this profession and create a recognition among the society and among the business community. Then comes the last of the stakeholder in the hierarchy in terms of the regulator part is the insolvency professional. So as per section 319 of the code, insolvency professional means a person who is enrolled under section 206 with an IPA as its member and registered with the IPPI as an insolvency professional under section 207. And section 207 says that every IP shall, after obtaining the membership of any IPA, register himself with IBPI within such time in such manner and on payment of the fee as may be specified by the regulation. So that means now there are two sections, 206 and 207. First is 319 defines who is the IPA, and then 206 and 207 tells the process that how IP can become a member of the IPPI. Then section 206 has certain restrictive clause that no person shall render services as an IP under this code without being enrolled as a member of an IP and registered with IPPI. So that is a restrictive clause. That means every person cannot become a particular IP. So the regulations have been framed in 29 November 2016, and the regulations are now in force. And it is being said that no minor or person not resident in India or does not have the qualification experience specified in the regulation can become an IP. So the required qualification experience have been given, specified that who can become an IP. And then the further restrictive clause as that he has not been, if he has been convicted by any competent court for an offense punishable with imprisonment greater than 6 months, or any offense involving moral turpitude, a period of 5 years has not been elapsed from the date of the conviction, probably he shall also not be eligible to become an IPA. Then is not an undischarged, is an undischarged insolvent, or has applied to be adjudicated as an insolvent as under this code also, and has been declared to be of unsound mind as not or is not a fit or proper person. So friends, these are very general clauses, and I think this applies to every class of person across the various other acts also. If a person is holding a position or has a degree of such nature, probably we have to have these clauses, and which will restrict that only genuine and ethical person get involved in this profession. Then the other criteria in terms of qualification and experience are that he has passed the National Insolvency Exam or has passed the Limited Insolvency Exam and has 15 years of experience in management after receiving the bachelor degree. Then either he can also pass this Limited Insolvency Exam and has 10 years of experience as a CA, CS or CMA or an advocate. Now from this we understand that who can become an IPA. First he has to pass National Insolvency Examination, or he has to pass a Limited Insolvency Examination, provided he has got the respective degrees, that is the MBA or bachelor's degree from an established university or recognized by law, and has got the 15 years of experience, or with the 10 years of experience, provided he has got the qualification of CA, CS, CMA or an advocate. So there are two criteria, 10 and 15 years. Based on that, he can appear in the Limited Insolvency Examination, or he has to appear for a National Insolvency Examination without these two limitations. Yes, the functions of an insolvency professional. Now, if you see the hierarchy again, let's go back to the hierarchy. The administration part is covered by the IBPI, that is the board. Then that further administration is given to the IPA, who will govern the IPs. And IPs are the people who will actually go into the ground and do the work of insolvency. The reality, the groundwork, the actual actions will be taken by the IP, and that is why a lot of functions have been given to the person that is IP, and a lot of obligations are being casted on this IP to ensure that the objective of the code is achieved. So section 208 defines the functions that where any insolvency resolution, fresh start, liquidation or bankruptcy process has been initiated under this act, it shall be the function of IP to take such actions as may be necessary in the following matters, namely a fresh start order under process in the chapter 2 and 3. We'll understand what is that, or an individual insolvency resolution process under chapter 3 and 4. So we'll understand that what is chapter 2, 3 and chapter 3 of part 3 with respect to individual. Then you will also be responsible for the corporate insolvency resolution profession in the chapter 2 of the part 2, which is now in the current state. If you see, this is applicable. Then for the individual bankruptcy, you will be responsible under chapter 4 of part 3, or under liquidation of a corporate debtor firm under chapter 3 of part 2. So if you see, the A and C are relevant today. B is not relevant today because it has not been applicable so far. So what are the obligations, friends? I think obligations are huge, many. And if you talk to any IP, then you'll understand that yes, is he has been working day in and day out with a lot of responsibilities on their head, and probably they are trying to ensure that the objective is achieved to whatever possible extent they can within all the limitations of the law and other practical aspects. So the obligations are to take reasonable care and diligence while performing duties. That is obviously there. That has to be there. Then to comply with all the requirements and terms and conditions specified in the bylaws of the IPA. So he'll become a member of IPA, respective IPA, whichever IPA wants to become a member, and then he has to comply with the law and to allow the IPA to inspect his records whenever required, and to submit a copy of the records every proceeding before the adjudicating authority as and when demanded. Okay, so that was the administration part, the regular part. Now let us come to the adjudicating authority. Now we all understand, as we have discussed, that there is a DRT, that is a debt recovery tribunal. Probably that will be the adjudication authority for the individual and partnership firm. Then there is an NCLT, and for each different state there will be a different NCLT. Let's say for Delhi there is an NCLT at Delhi. For Haryana and Punjab there will be at Chandigarh. For Rajasthan it will be at Jaipur. For UP it is at Ahmedabad. For MP it is at Indore bench. So each state will have their own independent bench sitting out there, National Company Law Tribunal. Then we have one appellate tribunal, which is now at Delhi, and which is again another bench has been set up at Chennai also. Then we have the Supreme Court. So if you see, the debt recovery tribunal will be covering the individual firms, the NCLT will be covering the companies LLP, and then the CLAT will be again to hear the appeals on orders passed by the board in respect to IPs and IUs. And then there's the Supreme Court for to hear appeal on orders passed by NCLAT and DRN, right? So this is the whole structure for the adjudicating part. And probably this makes things again very interesting, friends, because as lawyers we'll have lot many opportunities coming in terms of the insolvency, though for the time being the act has been withdrawn for next 1 year. But yes, that is only for a limited time period. But going forward, again, we all believe that a lot of good potential, good opportunities are going to come. And in the last 3 years, if you have seen, a lot of lawyers have engaged themselves in this particular area of NCLT and Supreme Court. So a promising area for all of you friends, and I think one should explore this opportunity. So that is again covering the two aspects, that is the adjudicating authorities and the regulators. So that was covering the overall basic holistic part of the institutional framework of IBC. And so we have covered first the basic understanding that why IBC was created, what was the purpose of IBC. Now we have understood the institutional framework where we have the IPA, we have the insolvency professionals, we have the IBBI and the various courts. So now we have got an holistic view, the macro understanding of this particular act. Let us go ahead and understand that what would be the basic terms, what are the basic things involved in this particular act, and then we'll go in details of each of the sections and understand the process of the IBC. So the basic terms, as the code is suggesting, there's an insolvency, there's a bankruptcy, and there's a liquidation. These are three terms which normally comes and which are interchangeable at times. But there is a difference. What is the difference then? Insolvency will be the inability of a person or the corporation to pay their bills, right? So it may be not be able to pay amount to the creditors, it may not be able to pay to the lenders. That is, then that company can go for insolvency. Or the bankruptcy comes in when a person is declared the incapable of paying the dues, right, and will payable. So when it is talking about a person, right, insolvency is with respect to the corporation, right, the corporate fund. And liquidation is the process of winding up a corporation or incorporated entity. That means when the company will not be able to sold off, no plan will come, no resolution plan comes in for the takeover of this particular company, then the company will go for liquidation. So there are three words. Though insolvency, liquidation are related to the corporate world, but the bankruptcy is more related to the individual friend. So normally they are interchangeable, but then there are thin lines of demarcation between these three terms. So as I explained, insolvency relates to corporate company LLP and bankruptcy relates to individual. So insolvency, basically a common term which comes under IBC for insolvency, the CIRP, that is Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process. Liquidation basically refers to sale of assets of all the companies, and dissolution comes to the closure of the company. So these are the three stages. It starts with insolvency, And the first step is under the IBC that the company will go for insolvency. Then if the insolvency process is over, then the company will go for liquidation where the assets will be sold off. And then there will be a dissolution of the company when the company will be closed, right? So that will permanently say now the company does not exist in this world. So now we have understood the process, the terms first, the insolvency, bankruptcy, and liquidation. Now how these steps will be followed one by one. So now this picture the clear picture we are getting out of this particular slide is that, it will be ILD, a process of starting from the resolution plan acceptance, inviting the resolution plan for taking over this company. If that does not happen, the company has to go for liquidation, and then company will dissolve. Then there are certain other terms which has to be understood, friends, that who can initiate this CIRP. When I mentioned this word CIRP in this particular slide, if you see that the insolvency means the initiation of the CIRP process, that means who will initiate the CIRP process, who will take the company into insolvency. So there are creditors. There's the one angle, there's the creditors, and the other angle is corporate debtor. Corporate debtor is the company against whom we are trying to take that company into insolvency, and the creditors are the people who will take the corporate debtor to insolvency. Remember, right? So creditors and corporate debtors. So creditors can be classified into two parts. Normally, the creditors are basically creditors only. So either they can be secured, unsecured, and the trade creditors. So again, on that criteria, the creditors have been segregated. So one is the operational creditors and another is the financial creditors. So these are the two type of creditors who can take the corporate debtor, CD. In short, they are referred to as CD, corporate debtor, the company, right? For example, the SR Steel company was taken for insolvency by the financial creditors, that is the lender. Bhushan Steel was taken to insolvency by the financial creditors. So there are so many companies where financial creditors have taken the company to insolvency, like the Jet Airways, and there are so many companies where operational creditors have taken the company to insolvency. Right? Now, who are operational, who are financial, we'll understand later. Normally, a basic understanding is people who have supplied material or services, they are termed as operational creditors, and people who have given loan, they are termed as financial creditors. So who can be operational? So if you see, the operational can be the employees, the trade creditors, the laborers, again the workforce, the people who have given the asset on rent, utility bills, tax department, that is the government, they can be operational also. And financial consists of the banks, financial institutions, the NBFCs, or any other lender who have given loan to the particular company. Right. So if you see now the terms, again going back, so there is a CD, corporate debtor, there is the FC, financial creditor, there is a OC, operational creditor, then we have the CIRP, the process where the company goes for insolvency, then there is a liquidation where the assets of the CD would be sold off in the market, and then finally the dissolution of the company, that is the closure of the company. So a lot of terms, if you see, there are a lot of terms which will come, a lot of technical jargon which will come in, which we basically refers to the IBC jargon, the family of the words of IBC. There will be a glossary, there will be a lot of new terminology which will come to your world if you enter this particular IBC world. So how IBC works, if you have understood the framework, you have understood the people involved and the basic understanding of all the terms, but how does it work? Where does this start? Where does it start? So the model is very simple. I think it's a 5-step model. If you understand, the 5-step model tells us you have to apply to NCLT because it is a company. You have to apply to NCLT. Who will apply to NCLT, friends? Again, hear me. These who will apply to NCLT, as I mentioned, two types of creditors: the financial creditors and the operational creditors. Correct. Then once you apply to the NCLT will either admit the application or reject the application, whatever the case may be. And once that is done, if it admits it, then the process of CIRP, again, hear me again, the word CIRP, where the corporate insolvency resolution process will start by forming a COC, that is a committee of creditors. Then the plan will be invited from all the stakeholders, whoever is interested to buy out the company. And if the plan is not accepted, then the either of the application, the acceptance of plan will be there, or if it is not done, then the company will go for liquidation. So this is basically the 5 steps where the IBC will comprise of all these sections. These are the 5 steps where we have to focus on, and more on the execution part. And this job is being taken care by the IP. Remember, IP will take care of this particular segregate all these 5 steps. So there are 5 parts of this particular act, 5 parts consisting of a lot of chapters and a lot of sections, right from section 1 till 240, 255 sections, and remember. So many sections have been framed, but let me tell you, for the current state, I think part 3 has not been applicable so far. So that means section from 78 to 187 become irrelevant. Then yes, 188 to 203 is again related to information utilities, that is, and the regulations of the IPA, which is purely dedicated to the administration part of the IPA and information utility. Yes, I mentioned to forget about what is IU, information utility. Friends, information utility is a separate entity, which the purpose of creating this IU is where all the records of any debt which the financial creditor has given to the corporate debtor has to be recorded in that information unit. So if you put it in common words, it is a data warehouse. It is a data warehouse of all the loan which has been given to by the bankers. So that the bankers have to record those information in the IU, and then the IU also allows all the insolvency professionals to upload lot many information in the IU level. So basically, information duty is nothing but then a place where we can store a lot of information, data, and whenever required by various adjudicating authorities or the board, probably we can go and approach that particular information utility and extract data and then submit it, which will be regarded as an authenticated and a certified data. So again, administration part, aiding, supporting or facilitating the role of insolvency process. So that part 4 is purely for the IPA and the information utility part, and part 5 is the miscellaneous section, which will cover all the rights which is given to the government and for the administration and for further facilitation of the execution of the law. So our main focus will be on the part 1 and the part 2, and part 1 is again purely the definition part. So the total focus will come on the orange part, that is part 2, where the focus is on the insolvency resolution and liquidation for the corporate person. So in the next classes, we'll try to cover all these part 2 and then discuss the various provisions of the act. So that comes to the second part, conclusion of the second part of the introduction of IBC law, where we have understood the institutional framework, the various stakeholders, and basic understanding of various terms under the IBC, FC, OC, CIRP, liquidation, insolvency, and the overall holistic view of the IBC code from part 1 to part 5. Okay, so hope that you must have understood the concept. Please do revise it whenever we start with our next part, which will be again more technical, more depth analysis of each of the various provisions of the Act. Okay, so let us meet next time with the part 1 and part 2 of IBC code. Thank you, friends.